What design can do? Yeah, you could say that this is one of the main questions in the work and career of our first speaker. Professor Paul Hekkert conducts research on the way products influence human experience and behavior. This knowledge allows designers to make more deliberate decisions and empowers them to become leaders of product innovation. In fact, it's not about what design can do, but what design must do. Please welcome Professor Paul Hekkert.
Well, good morning. It's an immense pleasure and honor to be on this stage at this anniversary edition of What Design Can Do. Congratulations, Richard, and your team for this achievement. And I think What Design Can Do has now entered the Champions League of design conferences around the world. So, that said, here. Can I have a cartoon, please? This is a cartoon that was especially made for this event, for this moment. Have a close look. It's not only to grab your attention for my talk, it's also to show you what design actually can do for people and for society. It may not be immediately clear, but I will explain it more thoroughly at the end of my talk. I have a very modest ambition for this talk, and this modest ambition is to explain in 20 minutes what design can do, what kind of effects design can have on people and society. I want to explain, and I'm a professor, so I should explain stuff, right? I want to explain how design can do it, what kind of methods designers can employ to get about these effects, and I want to explain why designers have the moral obligation to do so. 20 minutes, right, here we go. What design can do. Some of you may have expected a professor of aesthetics to talk about beauty and aesthetics. Well, let's have a look at a couple of designs. On the left top-hand corner, you see a light switch, an ordinary light switch, you could say. On the left bottom, you see a garbage bag. Not so ordinary, but still. And on the right, you see a app for your smartphone, a word game. These three designs may not look very special and certainly not aesthetically enormously attractive. But now, look at the effects for which they were designed. A light switch, this light switch is out of visual balance when the lights are on. It stimulates people's innate needs for order and symmetry to switch off the light and thereby save energy. The garbage bag. The goedzak is a transparent bag for things that are no longer used but are still in good condition. It was designed with the aim of enabling people to be generous towards strangers. And thirdly, the famous app Temstem. It's an app for psychotic patients who are troubled by disturbing voices in their heads. The word game activates the same brain area and thereby interferes with these voices. We recently did a study in which we showed these designs together with these texts, the underlying ideas for which they were designed, and we showed that people increasingly find these designs aesthetically appealing when they know the effects for which they were designed. Can I have some water, please? And the main effect, the main principle that governs this kind of effects is the principle that we call maximum effect for minimum means. And this principle explains why we like a simple solution, a minimal solution that has an enormous effect in general. And that applies to chess moves, that applies to architecture, that applies to line drawings, it applies to mathematical formulas, to metaphors. And so it applies in general when you have a formula with only a few parameters that explains a wealth of phenomena. Scientists would call that a beautiful formula. Let me give another example from two German friends of a MEM design, a maximum effect for minimum means design. So this MEM principle explains how the means is related to the effects for which the product was designed. And that relationship is covered in this extremely complicated model that I will try to explain very briefly. The effects that I'm talking about are on the top of the model, where we see the behavior, the experience, and the attitudes that you can attain for, that you can strive for as a designer. Let's have a look at the behavior effects that we talk about. For example, this is the countdown at a traffic light that we find all around the world these days. And these countdowns inform you about the number of seconds that you still have to wait for the traffic light. And by informing you, it takes away your uncertainty, it alleviates your anxiety, and it makes you eventually, hopefully, stop at the traffic light, stopping that you did not do before. It has tremendously changed the scenery in Amsterdam, I can assure you. And this eventually leads to a better city, a city with less accidents and a city with less chaos in traffic. The attitudes, the standards, the values, the norms people have towards the world, that's also something that can be affected by designs. This is the service, the app and the service Peerby that was designed to allow people to borrow goods from other people, from the neighbors, from people in their surroundings. And as such, it helps to get people into contact with the people around them. But not only that, it can also eventually, and that's something we can anticipate, it can eventually change our attitude towards ownership. We may not need any longer to have all the stuff at our homes when it is very easy to borrow it next door. And finally, the experience or the long-term happiness and well-being for people that designs can have an impact on. And let me show you another movie to illustrate this.
For my graduation project at the TU Delft, I developed a game which allows isolated children in child hospitals to play with their peers. Even though they are very ill, they don't always feel sick and they still feel a strong drive to play and explore. But they have no way of getting into contact with their peers at the hospital. It's called Connect, and it's a game they can play on the windows between their rooms and the hallways. So Connect is a set of ambiguous shapes that you can attach to the window using suction cups and magnets. And by combining the ambiguous shapes in different ways, you can play different kinds of games. So you can play existing games like tic-tac-toe, but you can also play chess, or you can build your own fantasy world. To test Connect, I placed it at the oncology department of a Dutch child hospital, and this is what happened. So what you see here is two girls having a lot of fun together, even though they are separated by a physical barrier.
Oh, kijk, wee!
My ambition with Connect is to further optimize it and to produce it so it can actually be used in child hospitals.
Let me quickly take you through this design. So there are a set of product properties, the ambiguous shapes that this student is talking about, and they lead these kind of shapes. And these ambiguous properties lead to a particular interaction and experience, like playing games, like building a fantasy world, having fun in playing. Ultimately, however, this leads to another experience. And this experience is all about belonging, about social relationships, about not being isolated in a hospital when you have to be there as a kid. So now I've sketched some of the effects that designers can attain for in order to create a better world. I want to look further into how design can do it. And for that, we have to realize that designing for a particular effect is reasoning from top to bottom in that model that I just showed. And we have, over the years, developed an approach, a method that helps designers not only to reason from a particular effect all the way down to the product and its properties, but first and foremost to define and examine what kind of effects is the one to strive for. And I strongly believe that that's what designing is primarily about. Designing very profoundly what kind of effect you aim for. And when you design for these effects, when you design for a better world, so to speak, you're often confronted with all kinds of dilemmas. That's probably the reason why the world is, well, slightly imperfect, you could say. What kind of dilemmas am I talking about? For example, the conflict between personal and collective concerns. Some years ago, we did a project in a deprived neighborhood in Rotterdam, where people of all kinds of cultures and backgrounds live together. And what you typically see in these kind of neighborhoods is that people feel they should go their own way, do not want to be bothered by other people. That's their personal concern. But as a collective, we want them to live happily together. This was solved by one of our students by designing this birthday slides. This birthday slides is a slide that can be moved to the school when one of the kids has his birthday. And it has to be moved by a couple of parents. They have to do it together. Okay? And in this movement, they start their first moment of a conversation. They have to do it together, so they will start to talk. And we think this is not the most simple design, and from that perspective, maybe not the most beautiful design, but it nicely illustrates a strategy that we call implicative design, where we force people to do the right thing for the wrong reason. Another example of dilemmas or conflicting concerns, where, for example, think of meat consumption. Many of us would say, I want to eat less meat, or I want to eat animal-friendly meat, right? I think most of you will agree. Yet, when it comes to it, when you come to the supermarket, you're easily seduced by the meat that may not have been produced so sustainably. And one of our students, Anna Peters, she tried to solve this dilemma by designing a particular subscription to a particular farming procedure. So at home, behind your laptop, you decide what kind of farming, what kind of production methods of meat you feel related to, you feel committed to. You express that commitment in a membership for a particular meat, and once in the shop, you are automatically drawn towards the right type of meat, the one you choose for. So she brought together, she made your attitude consistent with your behavior. If you do not grasp the concept immediately, I will explain in a break. And finally, another type of conflict that we often see, where people say, that, well, of course I need to stay fit, I need to stay healthy, I need to exercise more, yet when it comes to it, they stay on the couch and watch a movie. So how can we solve this? Well, one of my PhD students is currently exploring the opportunity, the possibility of using negative emotions to solve this kind of dilemmas. Negative emotions, like all emotions, have an impact on our experience and on our behavior. The emotion of fear, for example, affects your field of focus. It narrows down your field of focus, and it stimulates you to run away from the cause of the fear. Well, he used this principle to stimulate people to be more active. And of course, you can raise fear in people, but you can only raise fear in people if you frame that fear protectively, which means that you make sure that people are not, that they get afraid, but they know that this fear is in control, like in a roller coaster or when you sit in a horror movie. And this is what he designed, a wristband that through audition and vibration gives you the feeling that some monster is chasing you while you're running. And you keep on running and you keep on running faster. That's the whole idea. It works, by the way. These are a couple of examples where we used theory, knowledge from different disciplines in order to not only realize the effect, to find the mechanism by which you can bring an effect into a design, but first and foremost, to define what kind of effect you should aim for given the world that you want to realize. And that brings me to the third part of my talk. Why design or designers should do it. Let me introduce you a politician. This is Guy Verhofstadt. Many of you probably know him. He was the former Prime Minister of Belgium, and he's currently the leader of the Liberals in Europe. And on various occasions, he has stressed that it is the task of the politician to develop a vision on the world of tomorrow, a vision of a better world, and then show us the way to get there and convince us that he is the right politician, or she, to follow. But if you come to think about it, as I did last night in the park, the politicians of today, many politicians of today, are the designers of the past. In the sense that a designer in the past, also the designers that were trained in our school, they were trained to serve people, to do what the people say they need or say they want, right? I believe the designer of today is the real politician. And the question then comes, so if the designers are the people who paint this picture of a better world, of the world of tomorrow, and act upon it by designing particular effects on people's behavior and experience, as I've showed, can we ask designers to indicate what is right and wrong? Can we ask designers to tell us where to go? Can we grant this kind of responsibility to designers? Because this responsibility can be big, right? I think there are a couple of reasons, at least three, that allows us to give designers this responsibility. This is the first one. I hope you now got the tweet that is represented here. Products have a profound impact on our behavior and well-being. Whether you like it or not, whether it was intended by the designer or not, products do have an enormous impact on how we relate to each other, how we interact with each other, how we deal with the world, how we deal with other people. And since products have this impact, we better take it seriously and design for it consciously. Secondly, people often lack willpower. You may not like this message, but it's true, because I say so. No, people lack willpower. People do often not know what they want. People do not like all these choices that we offer them. People want guidance. People want direction. Seriously. People want to be directed when they go to the urinal to pee in the right place. People want to be directed when they're flushing their toilet. And finally, and maybe this is the most important one, over the last 20 years at least, science has learned us a lot about what works for people and what does not work for people. Science has learned us how to live the good life, how to live a life that is worth living. The science of happiness or well-being or positive psychology, as we can call it, has learned us a lot what ultimately makes us happy and what can contribute to our well-being in the long run. And we should take this knowledge into account when designing the products that have an effect on people's behavior and well-being. Okay, to conclude, 40 seconds left. First of all, I hope you realize that designing for a particular effect in terms of a behavior, an experience, or some kind of value or attitude implies that you as a designer are acting manifestation independently, as we call this. You should not be bound to a particular type of design, to graphic design, Richards, or to architecture, or to whatever design discipline you feel you are competent. As a designer of an effect, you should strive to find the appropriate manifestation, be it an app, be it a graphic manifestation, be it a building, be it a system or some products that fits and that is most appropriate for the effect that you aim for. And we are currently exploring this notion of designing in a new design school that we are setting up in collaboration with a design consultancy in Delhi, India, which is called the Design Village, where we aim to train designers to first and foremost develop a picture of the world that they look for, that they strive for, and then find the most appropriate solution in any design domain. And that's a challenge, I can assure you, especially in India. Design for effects, as I explained, I think thoroughly, could be and should be knowledge or science driven. In many of the examples that I've shown, there is a lot of theory, methods, models that have been underlying the design. Theories about negative emotions, theories about altruism, theories about or knowledge about how the brain works. And these have made these designs so, I think, strong. And finally, design for effects. In this sense, you can make a difference in any domain. Designers should not be modest about the domain where they want to attain an effect. Maybe designers should be modest about the degree of their impact or their influence. But at least when it comes to the domains, any domain is worth designing for. As we sort of showed 2 years ago when we designed a new intervention for the democratic system in the Netherlands, which is called Vote on Your Birthday. What we proposed is, instead of voting once every 4 years on a particular day, we asked the people to vote each year on their birthday. And as a result, on every day in the year, thousands, 10,000s of people are voting. And this simple intervention, which is easy to do with the current technology, profoundly, we think, changes the way the politicians act, because they cannot promise a lot of stuff just before the election, because there's an election every day. It profoundly changes the way the politicians act, the relationship of the people to the politicians, and how the media is dealing with this relationship. I hope you get this effect. So, back to my cartoon, last slide. The guy in front is reading this book, The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, a Harvard psychologist. And in this book of over 1,000 pages that I can highly recommend, Pinker explains how over the last couple of centuries, violence has seriously declined all over the world. You may not believe it, but it's true. There's a lot of evidence that shows this. And how did this come? That's what Pinker is analyzing. Well, the main reason is the spread of knowledge. Science, the developments in science and the spread of knowledge have made it possible that people can easily take other people's perspectives, that we get a sense of what the human nature is about, that we can develop our empathy towards other people. And I think that's a very hopeful message by this design. And therefore, I believe that a smart design can have an impact when it is embodied with knowledge. Thank you for your attention.
Got to give the people time. Give people what they want.
Yes, one more question. We are a bit over time, so
I know.
I have to be very fast.
I'm so
Given the world you want to realize, I wonder, could you please tell us what you see as the most desirable effect that this design can bring about?
Wow. Just one?
One quick.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I hope, thank you for this question. I hope the message that I wanted to give is that it's up to the designer to decide what kind of effect he should strive for, or she should strive for. And I hope this designer will inform him or herself profoundly. There's a wealth of knowledge around us that you can use to design, to define, and to determine the effect you strive for. And then I think we can create this better world. But I give a lot of responsibility back to the designer.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Mr.
pleasure.
Paul Hekkert, thank you.